My name is Master Sergeant Luke Coleman, and at 42 years old, I have spent 19 years working the same stretch of sun-baked concrete at a military base in Texas. I never chased medals or titles. I cared about keeping the place running, the kind of running most folks never notice because it only matters when it stops. I learned early that quiet work builds the strongest walls, and I was fine living inside those walls if it meant things stayed steady for the people who depended on me. I handled logistics, maintenance, coordination, equipment, routing, transport, timing, and every unseen bolt that kept the machinery of the base from rattling apart. Most people thought the base ran on fuel orders and discipline. I knew it ran on checklists at sunrise, repairs at midnight, and the stubborn will to do things right even when no one was watching. I never needed someone to pat me on the back for that. The hum of a generator coming online again was enough. Over the years, I learned every corner of the base, like the lines on my own hands. I could walk into a supply room and know exactly what had been moved without checking a clipboard. I could hear a truck idling wrong from 100 yards away. I could look at a weekly report and know which numbers were real and which came from someone rushing through a shift. That familiarity came from time, patience, and a stubborn pride I rarely admitted to anyone. People sometimes called me dependable, though most days it sounded like they meant predictable. I never fought the label. If being predictable meant the convoys rolled out on time, the ammo counts matched, and the younger soldiers felt a little safer, then predictable suited me fine. The base changed commanders and captains year after year, but I stayed the steady weight in a world built on movement. That was my choice. I got used to being the one people came to when they wanted something fixed quietly. A misfiled form, a truck that kept stalling a shipment that arrived light. I could handle it before it grew teeth. It was not glamorous work, but it kept the wheels turning. I liked knowing the crew trusted me, even if they showed it more in nods than words. Respect does not always make noise. Sometimes I wondered what kept me here after all these years, long after many friends had rotated out to civilian life. Maybe it was the sense of purpose I found in solving problems before they became disasters. Maybe it was growing up in a house where you learned early that steady hands mattered more than loud ones. Or maybe it was simply that the base had become a piece of me shaped by every long night and every early morning. I never tried to stand out. The higher-ups held their meetings and planned their restructures and invented new ways to call old systems outdated. I stayed in the motor pool, the supply chain office, the comms shed, wherever the real work was being done. That was where I felt grounded. I knew some officers barely remembered my name, but the sergeants and specialists did, and that was enough for me. If there was one thing I took quite a pride in, it was that nothing collapsed on my watch. Trucks rolled. Radios connected. Rations counted out clean. Every part of the base leaned on another part, and I knew exactly how much pressure each part could hold. It made me feel anchored in a way nothing else did. I liked knowing people could work their shifts without thinking twice about the pieces I held together for them. I guess that is why I never minded staying late or showing up early. Some folks work by the clock. I worked by the rhythm of the bus. When the generators hummed steadily and the loading bay lights clicked off one by one, I felt something settle in me. I could go home knowing I had earned another day of quiet trust. Looking back, I realize I built a life by being the quiet backbone, the one who carried weight without asking anyone to notice. It was not a title, but it was mine. And for 19 years it was enough. What I did not know then was how quickly that balance could shift when someone with more rank than sense walked in and decided the base needed fixing. I was not looking for a fight. But sometimes conflict finds you the moment someone decides your quiet work is easy to replace. He arrived just after the new year, fresh-pressed uniform, perfect smile, and a resume that read more like a LinkedIn profile than a duty roster. Captain Dylan Braxton, 29, West Point grad, father, was a retired brigadier general who now consulted for defense contractors, and his godfather just happened to sit on the board of one of the base's logistics vendors. He introduced himself like he was pitching a merger firm, handshake, eye contact just a second too long, and buzzwords stacked on buzzwords like he thought we were building a startup instead of prepping convoys. He came in swinging, talking about transformation, lean methodology, and system overhauls. Said he wanted to take us into the future. Said words like optimization and scalability with such confidence that you almost forgot he didn't know how to read a freight log or trace a lost pallet. His first week, he scheduled a presentation with slides full of digital renderings, timelines, and buzzwords layered over stock photos of warehouses he'd never stepped inside. He called it Phase 1. Phase 1 meant changing everything that worked so it could sound newer. He restructured reporting channels, added 5 layers of approvals for equipment transfers, and centralized data into a dashboard no one knew how to use. He brought in consultants who walked around the base, nodding at things they didn't understand, making notes in tablets and calling them discoveries. Half our crew couldn't even access the new platform without a separate login they never received. I didn't say anything. I sat in the back of the briefing room and listened, arms crossed, notebook in my lap. Not the digital kind. A real one with creased pages and ink smudges. The one I'd been using for years to track everything from spare parts inventory to breakdown patterns on older trucks. He called the old systems outdated. Legacy. He said it with a smile, like he was doing me a favor. The thing is, I've seen officers like him before. Men who thought leadership meant speed, not weight. Who thought you could replace experience with an app and call it progress. Most of them got rotated out before the coffee machine learned their name. Braxton, though, was different. He had staying power. Not because he was good, but because of who he knew. He started calling me Legacy. Luke said it in front of a room full of junior officers like it was a joke. I didn't flinch. I've been called worse. I just looked at him then, at the projector screen behind him, and made a mental note of how many red flags were flashing on that supply chain model he'd pasted from a vendor demo. It was like watching a kid ride a bike with no chain. Flashy, but pointless. Braxton talked about systems as if he'd built them himself. He didn't understand that logistics wasn't just numbers in a dashboard. It was knowing which supplier cuts corners, which crate arrives 2 pounds light every time, which truck's engine won't start if it rained the night before. He didn't see the people. He saw process charts. The crew started getting twitchy. Timelines were slipping, paperwork doubling, and nobody could find anything without opening 3 different tabs. But Braxton didn't seem to notice. He thought noise meant movement. The more confused everyone got, the more confident he became. Like he'd lit a fire and called it progress. I stayed quiet, but I started writing more. I logged his changes. Every access update, every system switch, every memo with his name at the bottom. I didn't complain. I just watched him cut his own safety net thread by thread. And I waited. Not because I wanted revenge, but because sometimes the only way to teach a man like that is to let him feel the drop. By the end of the 2nd month, he'd managed to put himself at the center of a system he didn't understand. He held meetings about agility, pushed out updates that made the network stall, and told command we were operating more efficiently than ever. I let him, because the truth was the deeper he dug, the easier it would be to let the whole thing collapse on him when the time came. And I could feel it coming. Not fast, but steady. Like a slow turn towards something he couldn't see yet. Something he wouldn't be able to fix with a memo or a phone call. Something only someone like me could stop. But I had no intention of stopping it. Not anymore. It happened on a Tuesday morning, tucked between 2 planning meetings and a fuel delivery that arrived half short. A formal memo signed by Braxton and Rubber, stamped by the brass, landed in my inbox. Effective immediately, I was no longer authorized to approve logistics requests, manage personnel assignments, or oversee technical scheduling. They left me in the system, though. A holdover, they called it, to ease the transition. What it really meant was that I could still see everything. Read only officially. But old access pathways tend to linger in systems no one understands completely. I didn't argue. I nodded when the captain explained it in front of a few junior staffers, like he was giving me early retirement wrapped in polite words. I took the memo, folded it once, and tucked it into my notebook. That was the last time I answered him with anything more than a nod. I didn't push back. I didn't file an appeal. I simply stopped correcting the small mistakes. When the supply roster didn't sync right and rations were miscounted, I let it ride. When the fuel allocation came in marked for the wrong vehicle group, I said nothing. The younger guys started noticing. They'd come to me with questions, and I'd shrug. Ask your supervisor. Let them figure it out. I wasn't being petty. I was following orders. I started logging every misstep, every blind approval, every forgotten update. Time, date, system, effect. I used the same notebook I always had, the one nobody ever asked to see. Each page started to feel heavier than the last. Braxton continued blind to the cracks. He'd host morning briefings, tossing around jargon like a man playing house with a live grenade. He didn't know the system he was breaking, and I wasn't about to save him from himself. I could have fixed it all. One log in a few back-end patches, a redirect on inventory flow. But I didn't. I let the gears grind slow and loud like warning signs nobody wanted to hear. And I kept writing. This wasn't sabotage. It was a restraint. He'd taken away my tools and expected me to still build the house. I chose to let the foundation speak for itself. Sometimes the loudest message is the one you don't say out loud. By the end of the month, the error list in my notebook was 10 pages long. I didn't need to raise my voice. The system was already shouting. All I had to do was keep listening. It started with a shipment of vehicle parts that showed up 4 days late and missing half the load. No one could tell where the rest had gone. Braxton blamed the vendor, but the order numbers didn't match the logs, and no one wanted to say it out loud. Then the comms lines in Sector 3 started dropping without warning. Maintenance flagged the issue, but their ticket got routed to the wrong queue and sat untouched for a week. By the time anyone acted, patrol reports were being sent by hand. Gear started going missing. Not stolen, just misplaced in a maze of system updates and relabeling schemes. Soldiers showed up for missions and found half their kits rerouted or marked, checked out to names that hadn't been on the base in months. I sat at my usual desk in the corner of logistics, the same chair no one thought to remove. From there, I saw everything. I watched the breakdown ripple outward, not fast, but steady, like a crack crawling across glass. Troops started whispering. Nothing formal, just the kind of hallway tension that builds when people stop trusting the flow of information. They stopped asking questions out loud. But now and then, someone would glance my way like they were hoping I'd step in. I didn't. I logged the outages, the mismatched serials. The chain of command corrections were issued 3 times in a week because no one could find the right field radio. It was like watching a machine lose its rhythm. Braxton called another briefing full of energy and fake certainty. Said we were entering Phase 2. Said things were progressing exactly as planned. His voice cracked on that last word, but no one corrected him. Some of the sergeants started bypassing channels. They made quiet trades, rearranged duties, and ran shadow checks. Passive resistance. They weren't mutinying. They were surviving. I never offered advice. I never corrected course. I just wrote it all down. Every slip, every delay, every moment when someone asked for help and got silence. The more he tried to control the system, the more it pushed back. By the end of the week, a requisition request for night vision gear looped through 6 approvals and came back empty. A corporal cursed under his breath. I flipped a page in my notebook and kept writing. I didn't have to lift a finger. The system was collapsing under its own weight. The exercise had been scheduled for months. A joint force simulation meant to stress test our readiness, involving 3 battalions' live convoy movements and timed resupply drills. Everyone knew it was coming, but no one expected the system to fall apart before we even left the motor pool. First, the supply crates weren't where they were supposed to be. The staging zone was half empty. Teams scrambled to locate basic gear radios, hydration packs, and fuel manifests. The new logistics platform Braxton had pushed wasn't syncing with the old inventory logs. Then the radios failed. Entire comms chains went dark just as the first wave of vehicles moved out. Dispatch scrambled to reroute through backup channels, but most of those had been quietly decommissioned during Braxton's last update push. Convoys left late and without full loadouts. One unit ended up 20 miles off course because the GPS mapping hadn't been updated to reflect last month's roadwork. Meanwhile, coordination between teams stalled because digital scheduling hadn't synced past Tuesday. I sat in the control tent, watching the monitors blink and freeze. No one told me to be there. I just showed up like I always did. The captain running the comms grid asked me if I'd seen a routing conflict before. I didn't answer. I just watched the screen flicker again and wrote another line in my notebook. Braxton arrived 20 minutes late, phone in hand, sweat at his collar, still trying to act like it was all under control. He barked orders. Restart the sync. Clear the cache. Push the diagnostics. Nothing worked. The system locked him out halfway through the override. Commanders started crowding around. They wanted answers. Braxton gave excuses. He blamed the system, the vendors, and outdated backups. One colonel asked where the backup gear was staged. Braxton blinked. He didn't even know there was a separate supply protocol for emergencies. Then a message came through from the field. A squad had been stranded without transport because their vehicle wasn't listed in the manifest. They waited for 2 hours in full gear under the sun. No water, no shade, no explanation. That was the moment. I stood up quietly, slowly, and walked to the folding table at the back of the tent. I laid my notebook down. No speech. No accusation. Just page after page of dates, errors, screenshots, policy changes, and every system failure logged in quiet ink. One of the officers started reading. The others leaned in. You could hear the silence shift in the room. I didn't have to say his name. Every entry pointed in the same direction. Braxton tried to speak. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. He reached for the notebook. One of the majors held it out of his reach and kept reading. The air in the tent turned thick. No one made a sound. I stepped back, watched it land, watched the faces turn as realization spread like a ripple through calm water. They knew. Every delay, every missed shipment, every mistake they had shrugged off had been building toward this. Someone called for the base commander. Someone else pulled Braxton aside. He looked like a man who had just seen the floor vanish under him. Pale breath, short sweat shining on his neck. He glanced at me once. I met his eyes, held it for a beat, then looked away. The notebook kept circling, from hand to hand. Officers nodding slowly, whispering in clipped tones. Someone cursed under their breath. The colonel who had questioned Braxton earlier stared at a page, jaw-tight, fingers drumming the table. When the base commander arrived, he asked one question. How the hell did this happen? The major didn't answer. He just passed over the notebook, now open to a page flagged in red. I knew what it said. March 12. Policy change, access consolidation. Approved by Captain Dylan Braxton. There was nothing left to say. The collapse had already happened. This was just the moment they saw it. Not the chaos, but the cause. And all I did was let the system speak for itself. They told me Braxton had been suspended pending review. The formal tone of the email didn't soften the weight behind it. No apologies, just an offer for me to step in as temporary regional oversight until things are settled. I said I'd think about it. Then I packed my truck, one duffel and a thermos of coffee, and headed out before sunrise. The base looked quiet in the rear view, still holding its breath like it knew change was coming. I didn't need a parade. I didn't want a speech. Just silence and the steady hum of the tires against the road. The thing about being the backup guy for so long is you get used to not being seen. But driving away that morning, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. No more covering for someone who didn't listen. No more cleaning up messes I didn't make. Just clean air, an open sky, and the road stretching out ahead. I passed the old diner near the edge of town and remembered the first time I pulled into that lot, 22 and full of fire. I'd thought I had to earn every ounce of respect. Turns out the quiet kind lasts longer. Somewhere past mile marker 32, I let the windows down. The breeze was cool, the sun just starting to climb. I took a slow sip of coffee and let the moment settle. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to watch Braxton fall apart. That part had taken care of itself. What I needed was this: the space to walk away without carrying the weight. The peace of knowing I had done my job not out of pride, but because it was the right thing. They'll figure it out eventually. Maybe they'll call. Maybe they won't. Either way, I've still got my name, my notebook, and a drive ahead of me. That's enough. Sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally been seen. Let them talk about what went wrong. Let them sort through the pieces. I'll be somewhere quiet, watching the sunrise, knowing I didn't have to prove anything.